Hello and welcome to Hot and Heavy, the Elaine Venice podcast. I'm your host, Shivani Desai. Today I'll be talking about Season 8, Episode 15, The Susie. Hello, everyone. Ooh, it's early morning. It's not even 7 a.m., but I'm recording this early in the day because I've got a jam-packed schedule for the next couple of days. I felt like I sounded a little like Cher there. I got a jam-packed schedule, you idiot. That sounded nothing like Cher. Okay, it's early. I have early morning voice, so I apologize if I'm a little gravelly. Okay, what am I doing here? I don't know if any of you have watched the documentary on Hulu called Brats. It is about the Brat Pack, and it's made by one of the Brat Pack members, Andrew McCarthy, who was in Weekend at Bernie's. And we all know how Elaine feels about the Weekend at Bernie's franchise. I was really excited for that documentary to come out. I am a child of the 80s. I absolutely lived for those John Hughes movies. So I was really excited to see what this documentary produced. And it was funny. I was kind of like, did Andrew McCarthy not get like any budget for this? Some of it was pretty rough in the sense like the sound is really bad. It's like, did they not have lav mics? I don't understand. Yeah, so it's a little rough in parts production wise, but then it kind of gets better as time goes on. Now, he couldn't get all of the Brat Pack members, and I'm sorry, but according to me, some of the best ones, like Molly Ringwald and Judd Nelson, both did not participate, which, come on, if you're going to do a documentary about the Brat Pack, those two need to be involved. But understandably, they just kind of didn't want to talk about being a part of that group of kids, because they were kids at the time, who were deemed this insulting moniker, and it wasn't fair. But I will say, once I finished the documentary, I thought it was really well done. I liked the way it was structured because there is even a part in the documentary where Andrew McCarthy interviews the journalist who coined the term Brat Pack. And I found that interview to be it's one of those things where it's like, I'm trying not to judge too much either way. Because I'll just say this, I don't want to ruin it for anyone out there who wants to watch it, but these actors, you really do understand, how much control they didn't have after that article came out, where it was the title, the headline of the article was called The Brat Pack, and talking about this new crop of actors and these young kids and how privileged they were and kind of wild or whatever, which, based on spending one evening with them, this is what the journalist chose to focus on, versus the fact that all these people were very serious actors, and they took their jobs very seriously. They wanted to be successful. They wanted to work with very reputable people. It wasn't just about the partying. So they all felt it was really unfair, and it affected their careers in very different ways, and how they felt about going into rooms after that came out, and what the connotation with that Brat Pack title carried with it. So it was just really interesting to see that. But then on the flip side, when the journalist who wrote that is interviewed, it was sort of like, I don't know, at least I got the sense this guy, I think he was just a little bitter. He was kind of jealous of Emilio Estevez and Rob Lowe and Judd Nelson. Like, he even said, oh, we were out to dinner. We went out to a restaurant, and of course they're all getting all this attention. Rob Lowe getting a bunch of attention, and I didn't get any attention, kind of thing. And he sort of says that in the sense that, like, oh, it didn't matter I didn't get attention because I was there to observe. But I'm like, but you said it. So I think you were kind of butthurt that you weren't getting all these ladies wanting to talk to you. But come on, I'm sorry, if Rob Lowe is sitting at a table you're not going to get any attention if you're not up to Rob Lowe's standards. And let's face it, barely anyone's up to Rob Lowe's standards, looks-wise. Anyway, I highly recommend it if you are of that generation and you love those movies. I think it's worth watching. It's on Hulu. Next, in my banter notes, I went to the Janet Jackson concert this week. And Miss Janet, if you're nasty, can still bring it. She was incredible. The whole show was great. Loved the set list. Yeah, it was so fun. Me and a few friends went together, just danced the night away. Nelly opened for her, which was just Flashback City. It was all Flashback City, of course. But Nelly is also just, he's still in great shape. He can perform really well. It was just a really fun night. It's kind of like the Shivani Childhood Tour this year. I mean, I got to see Madonna. I saw Sarah McLachlan a couple of weeks ago. Now Janet Jackson. I know Alanis Morissette's coming to town. We don't have tickets to that, but I might want to do that. I just heard Cyndi Lauper's going on tour. So it's like, oh my goodness. And I feel this urgency. I'm like, I need to see these artists before it's too late. And that doesn't mean before they die. It just means before they're like, hey, you know what? Touring does not sound like something I want to do. So I'm definitely trying to take advantage of seeing all these favorite artists of mine. But yeah, I think, I was thinking about all the songs I want to hear. I'm not one of those people who likes to look at set lists before a show. I don't really understand that. Why do you want to know about the show before you go? But that's just me. I'm old school. So I didn't look at the set list, but I was, of course, thinking about the songs I really wanted to hear. But the one song I didn't even think about that I like, me and my friend Margarita, we just like flipped out when we heard the intro. What have you done for me lately? That song is such a banger, and it still is, and it's so good, and it was such an amazing performance. Anyway, if Janet Jackson has yet to come to your town, she's coming in concert, I really recommend her. I booked a gig this week, which was really fun. It was for the Colorado Wildlife Association Conservation. I can't remember the last word of the acronym. But anyway, it required me to drive up to the mountains to film this hiking scene with another co-star, a good friend of mine. Well, we're good friends. we had worked together before. She was awesome. So it was really good to spend time with her as well. But holy shit. It is June on the flatlands of Colorado. It's about 90 degrees every day, but I had to be on set at 7 a.m. at Mount Blue Sky. So here in Colorado, a 14er is known as a peak that reaches 14,000 feet. And so Mount Blue Sky is one of those peaks. And so we didn't go all the way up to 14,000 feet. We were filming around 12,000 feet. But anyway, had to be there at 7 a.m. We met at like a base camp at the bottom of the mountain, and then we were driven up. It's also one of the highest paved roads in the United States, which is kind of cool. You can pretty much drive all the way up to 14,000 feet, which I think is amazing because a lot of these peaks, you gotta, climb the mountain. So anyway, it was a fun shoot in the sense that, wow, I get to be paid to be up here and experience this beauty, but it was also 30 degrees and super, super windy. And the wind chill was almost 0 degrees. And the wind was whipping. So it was a very, very uncomfortable shoot in that sense, but great people. They were trying their best to keep us warm. The wardrobe they had assigned for us wasn't the warmest wardrobe because they wanted it to look like, hey, it's summertime and these people are hiking. And I'm like, or my hands and feet are numb. But you know what, guys? I'm a professional, and sometimes acting is really hard. And so please keep me in your thoughts and prayers when I have to go through these types of things. I really appreciate it. So hard. Sarcasm. Okay, let's get into this episode. The synopsis for The Susie is as follows. Elaine assumes a second identity after a coworker calls her by the wrong name. She and Jerry decide to kill off her fictional identity, leading to a funeral in an imaginary woman's honor. A bookie mistakenly thinks Jerry wants to kill him after Kramer wins a big bet with Jerry's money. Kramer moves his watch ahead an hour a month before daylight savings time. Kramer informs George that George's girlfriend is breaking up with him on the eve of the Yankee Ball. This episode was written by David Mendel. Okay, we open the episode with a Benestanza cold open. How lucky are we? So in the cab, George is asking Elaine how much she thinks he could charge per night if he were a gigolo. She says, here or in Japan? What's the difference? Well, the Japanese are more enlightened, can see beyond the physical. George is so insulted. Forget Japan. How much would you pay? Oh, God, I don't know. $1? He says he thinks he's worth at least $300. Elaine's like, I don't think so. It's for all night. Yeah, I know. He says that you're demeaning me. And she's like, you're a gigolo. Yeah, well, you hired me. I'm the victim here. Did I force you into this life? He says, yes, you and every woman like you. My take on this scene, well, it starts at a high level because it's a Bena stanza scene, but it's not the best scene written, in my opinion. And it's also not long enough. I feel like we could have gotten a little bit more back and forth, but for what it is, I enjoy it. George and Elaine together really can't miss. All right, next we're on the street. Jerry and Kramer are walking, and Kramer's annoyed at how dark it's getting already. Well, it's not daylight savings time yet. When is it? I don't know. They just tell you the night before. He says, well, I'm sick of waiting, and Kramer springs ahead and sets his watch ahead an hour. I'm sure that's not going to cause any problems. They see Mike Moffat up ahead, and Jerry is not happy. Now, reminder, this was the guy who got in the parking dispute with George and also called Jerry a phony. So when they see him, Jerry's like, oh, God. Kramer's like, don't tell me you're still mad at him for calling you a phony. That was 5 years ago. He says, I'm not a phony, and I don't want anything to do with this guy. Immediately after that, Kramer calls for Mike to come over. He's all smiles and happy. He says, how you doing? Jerry says, fine, and I'm not just saying that. He tells them that he's become a bookie. So if you want to place a bet, I'm your guy. And Kramer says, oh, he can't. He has a disease. Jerry? I'm feeling a bit queasy myself. Maybe I'll see you in another 5 years. And Jerry exits. Mike looks after him and he's kind of miffed. He asks Kramer, is Jerry still upset about that whole phony thing? Are you kidding? It's all water near a bridge. Hey, what time you got? Kramer tells him it's almost 6. Whoa, I'm really late. And he exits. All right, next we're at the Peterman office building. Elaine is with the coworker Peggy, and she's praising her designs that Peggy's come up with. Oh, you really saved me. Peggy says, oh, it was no problem. Oh, Mr. Peterman's going to love these. As Elaine is on her way out of Peggy's office, Peggy thanks her, but calls her Susie. Elaine sort of hesitates, and Peggy just smiles at her. Elaine smiles back and she walks out, but then kind of pops her head back to correct her, but then decides not to and exits. The actress who plays Peggy is named Megan Cole. She's also appeared in Star Trek's both Next Generation and Deep Space Nine, also ER. And she's mostly a theater actress based out of Seattle. And according to her website, she teaches and gives workshops on acting technique. Although she's in her 80s now, so I'm not sure she still does that, but she has a really nice website. And I so enjoy her as Peggy. I think she's on par with JLD in terms of face acting. She's very entertaining. I love every line delivery. Her voice is so great. She really has such great presence. I'm a big fan of Megan Cole. And my take on this scene, very funny. It's an introduction to Elaine's plot. I love the reactions by JLD at the end. And I think we've all been there. When someone calls you by the wrong name, first of all, why are you embarrassed? But we're embarrassed about it, even though it's like, well, it's embarrassing for them. Maybe it's projected embarrassment. And as you can imagine, I've had to deal with that many times with a name like Shivani, but it really does happen to anyone. It doesn't matter if you have a quote unquote ethnic name. There's also something funny about the name Susie. I like the name Susie. No offense to Susies out there. It's not like your name is funny, but for whatever reason, it really works. With Megan Cole, the way she says it just makes it that much funnier. All right, next we're in Monks. Jerry and Elaine are discussing the Susie incident, and Jerry tells her, I don't see you as a Susie. Sharon, maybe. Elaine hates this. What am I, a bulimic, chain-smoking stenographer from Staten Island? Who are you describing? Someone I know, named Sharon. I'd rather not say. George arrives and he has a garment bag with him. Tells them it's a tux for the Pinstripe Bowl. Steinbrenner is throwing a big party at Tavern on the Green. Oh, kind of like a Yankee prom. I don't know why that's funny. He says it's not a prom, it's a ball. Are you taking Allison? Of course I'm taking Allison. George says of his girlfriend that she is genetically designed to go to a ball. Tall, blonde, lithe. Live? Elaine corrects him. Lithe. George thinks she's wrong. Lithe. Oh, lithe. That's funny. It's really good. I wonder how that came about. They didn't mention anything about it, but I imagine this was like true confusion when they did maybe a reading of this. I don't know. But I really like this little back and forth. Another one of those kind of asides that doesn't enhance the story, really has nothing to do with anything, but it just shows the flavor of this world and all these people, their relationship together. So I really enjoy that lithe part. George is so excited about her backless dress. He says, I'm finally going to make a great entrance. Backless, Elaine says. You're going to back her in? Elaine, when a woman makes a ball entrance, she twirls. Elaine knows better. She's like, she's not gonna, she'll twirl. By the way, that is one line we say in this house a lot. Somehow it comes up quite a bit. I don't know. It's just we're triggered by the word twirl. So we say that a lot. She'll twirl. My take on this scene, I love the exchange with Jerry at the top. Sharon, maybe? Jerry's like, didn't know that was going to trigger such a reaction. And I love how insulted yet protective Elaine is of this Sharon. And isn't it funny how sometimes people look like certain names and then they don't? I don't know. I don't have any examples, but I feel like this is a very common thing. Like, oh, that person doesn't look like a Gertrude. I don't know. Like, who does look like a Gertrude? That's something to think about. I love the Benestanza snark. We get a little taste of it. I mean, Elaine's just like, are you kidding me? She's not going to twirl. She'll twirl. And Elaine, I think this is indicative of how Elaine feels. She would never twirl if a man told her to. All right, next we're in George's apartment. George enters with Allison and he tells her that, Mr. Steinbrenner does want everyone to twirl. She's like, all right. He asks if she got her boss's Knicks tickets for Kramer and she hands them over. You can tell she needs to say something and she starts it a little bit. Hey, George. And he goes, oh, courtside. Is that the best you could do? Ha 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 ha. She's so irritated. She goes, George, we need to talk. What? I really think we need to talk. Uh-oh, George says. The actress here is Shannon Kenny. She plays Allison. She was a series regular on a show called The Invisible Man in the early 2000s, and she's also appeared in Seventh Heaven and Ned and Stacy. I like her just fine. Again, a pretty flat character, no surprise, for a love interest or a girlfriend. But you definitely believe how annoyed she is with George. All right, next we're in Jerry's apartment. Jerry's like, oh, she wants to talk. She doesn't want to talk. George says she needs to talk. Jerry's like, nobody needs to talk. Who would want to? George tells him that she tried to end it with me. What'd you do? He told her that he needed some soda and went out and never came back. All night? Yeah, I slept at my parents' house. And she wants to break up with you. Can you believe it? In fact, he's supposed to be having lunch with her right now at Pomodoro's. Uh-oh, Jerry says, that's the breakup place. What am I going to do? So you really like this girl? Jerry asks. No, I like the ball. He's like, it's my one chance to make a great entrance. My whole life, I've never made a great entrance. You made some fine exits. And Jerry's like, well, you can't keep avoiding her. And George comes up with this idea. Look, if she can't find me, she can't break up with me. And if we're still going out, she has to go to the ball. Kramer enters, asks George if he got the ticket from Allison, and George hands it over. Ooh, courtside. Don't let this girl get away. She'll have to find me first, as he slips on the sunglasses covers to his glasses, which are always fascinating to me. And George exits. Kramer tells Jerry he owes Mike $100 because he put a bet down. If the Knicks beat the Pacers by more than 35 points, it pays 10-1. Ooh, that's some sweet action. Jerry's like, I don't want any sweet action. Well, Kramer explains, I can't bet. I've got a gambling problem. So you put down my money? You don't have a problem. Not with that, no. Next, we're in Peggy's office. Elaine is walking by her door and Peggy calls her, Susie! Just the way she says it, so great. Elaine walks in reluctantly. It's kind of awkward. She starts, look, I should have said this yesterday, but... And then Peggy interrupts her. Did you see this memo from Elaine Bennis? Yeah, see, amazing that Peterman hasn't fired that dolt. She practically ran the company into the ground. Well, Elaine gets immediately defensive. Well, I thought she did a pretty good job. I heard she was a disaster, Suze. Look it! It's not Suze, all right? It's Susie. My name is Susie. My take on the scene. I keep saying it, but Megan Cole's delivery of Susie makes me laugh. Always. Susie. Apparently, David Mendel said in the commentary that became a thing around the office. People would just randomly yell out, Susie. Oh, funny. Again, just really entertaining. I love her facial expressions. Her voice, too. Like I said, it's just everything about Megan Cole's delivery is great, especially the way she says dolt. And I think we need to bring dolt back. Dolt is underrated as an insult. It's just, I mean, look at how mad Elaine got when she was called a dolt indirectly by Peggy. Bring it back. Let's start the trend. I like this scene. Elaine is clearly going to let Peggy know at the top of the scene about her mistake until Peggy starts bad-mouthing her. So it's a great emotional turn. I thought she did a pretty good job. Such a fun performance by JLD. And then the rage performance by JLD there, like my name is Susie, pounding her chest. Oh, it's so good. All right, next we're in George's apartment. The phone rings and, well, he's screening, so he lets the answering machine pick up, and we hear George's outgoing message. Now, of course, I shouldn't have to really tell any of you this. I assume you're listening because you're Seinfeld fans, but it's the theme of Greatest American Hero. It's a parody of it. George singing along to that tune, telling people that he's not home. I'm not going to sing it. I really have an urge to, but you all know it. I don't want to subject you to my singing. So anyway, it ends up it's Jerry, and Jerry says, pick up. I know you're screening for Allison. George picks up. Jerry wants to go to the coffee shop. He says, no, it's not secure. She knows I go there. The call waiting beeps, and he says, I need to let the machine get it, and hangs up on Jerry. We hear the theme song again, and George dances to it a little bit. Something that was mentioned in the commentary, David Mandel was saying how at this point, it's a rare thing for a show to have kind of dead air. Not that it's totally dead air, but they allow this theme song to play for a second time. And it's still funny. Like, that's a risk. That's a risk to kind of have that repeated moment for a sitcom. When you have limited time, you have to pack so much in, but it's so worth it. Like, you hear it that first time and you're like, what the hell is that? And then you hear it the second time. And of course, Jason Alexander kind of dancing around to it. It's so good. And it's so stupid. It works twice in a row. I love it. Everyone loved it. Anyway, good thing he screened it because it is Allison. She leaves a message. Well, first, before leaving the message, she says, I hate that stupid message. She tells him she knows he's avoiding her, but she really needs to talk to him. Please call me at the office. He calls her home number and leaves a message. Hi, Allison. I guess you're not at home. Probably should have tried you at the office. Anyway, good to hear from you. Really looking forward to the ball. And he hangs up and cackles. All right, next we're in Jerry's apartment. Elaine is so annoyed. Can you believe this woman? The nerve, talking about you behind your back and right to your face. She says no. Turns out Elaine's offended by her saying Suze and that she wouldn't mind Susie, Suzanne, Susanna, fine. But there is no way I'm going to be a Suze. Jerry's like, yeah, no Suze. What am I, a pom-pom waving backseat bimbo? Who are you describing? Someone I know. Named Suze? No, still Sharon. Kramer enters. He was at the game, but got kicked out for fighting with one of the players, Reggie Miller. Elaine asks, Cheryl Miller's brother? And of course they want to know the story. Well, first they started the game an hour late. Anyway, Spike Lee was jawing with Reggie, and Kramer got involved by throwing a hot dog at Reggie Miller. They all got kicked out. So that's it? Well, he says, I felt pretty bad about it, so we all went to a strip club. And then he exits. Can you believe that? Jerry says to Elaine. She says, I didn't even know Cheryl Miller's brother played basketball. Jerry's like, what? Kramer rushes back in and tells Jerry he won the bet since the Knicks covered. He says, of course, without Reggie Miller, it's a blowout. He said, that's a cool G, Daddy-O. Gotta let it ride. Kramer doesn't want to lose this feeling. He says, let's go down to the OTB and put some money on the ponies. All right, Jerry says. They just closed. Oh. My take on this scene, man, Elaine really can't take Suze. And she's so mad. She's so mad about it. She gave up Sharon. She was trying to keep her protected, but no, still Sharon. Great physicality with the pom-pom waving. I like how she does that. It's that curly hair too. The way it like whips around, it makes it even funnier. And also the way she gets in Jerry's face. There's no way I'm going to be a Suze. And this is such a small, random thing. But again, the small and random things make this show what it is. But Elaine knowing who Cheryl Miller is, but not Reggie Miller, always tickles me. I'm like, hell yeah, she knows about the WNBA. Good for you, Elaine. Very appropriate right now because WNBA is really becoming bigger and getting the recognition I think it deserves. All right, next we're in Peterman's office. Elaine says, you wanted to see me? He says that Peggy, down in design, apparently she got into a tiff yesterday with someone named Susie. Susie? He says, yes. Between you, me, and the lamppost, and the desk, Peggy tells me this Suze isn't much of a worker. Once again, Elaine the rage is bubbling up. She corrects him. It's Susie. He says, nevertheless, the house of Peterman is in disorder. First thing tomorrow morning, he wants to see Elaine, Peggy, and Susie in his office. All of us? Elaine asks. My take on the scene, this is really just to move the story along. Now Peterman is involved, and this whole thing got more complicated for Elaine because she could not keep her cool with Peggy. The Suze made all this happen. And maybe it's just the shortening of it. I don't know. Maybe that's why she hates Suze so much. Like she said, she likes Susie, Suzanne, Susanna. And I think we all have that, I suppose. I mean, I've always thought about this. If I was Patrick, if my name was Patrick, I wouldn't want to go by Pat. And maybe it's because the Pat character from SNL. I don't know. But I'm like, gosh, Patrick is a really cool name, but I would never go by Pat. And I guess you don't have to say it like Pat, but I think that would be my fear if someone was like, hey, Pat. The one I hear a lot, since it's a very common name now amongst young girls, is Maddie instead of Madeline or Madeline. I think Madeline is such a pretty name. So if I was a Madeline, I wouldn't want to go by Maddie. I would totally get in someone's face and say, hey, it's not Maddie. My name is Madeline. All right, next we're at Allison's apartment. Kramer is there to ask Allison for her boss's ticket again since the Rockets are in town. He wants to give it to Hakeem Olajuwon. He's got a real attitude. She asks if he has seen George around. I can't get a hold of him, she says. Oh, yeah, he visits the guy across the hall from me every 10 minutes. Oh, yeah? Allison is so happy to hear this. All right, next we're on the street. Jerry's unloading groceries from his trunk, and he's singing George's message song, which is so funny. Believe it or not, George isn't at home. I thought that was a nice touch. Mike comes along, and Jerry's excited. How about those Knicks? Mike tells him he can't pay him because he doesn't have any money. Jerry calls him out. You take a bet, and then you can't pay? Sounds a little, how you say, phony. Mike begs him for more time. You know, you're supposed to be the bookie. Act like one. I'm sorry. He offers to help Jerry with his groceries, and Jerry's trunk isn't closing properly, so Mike tries to help, but Jerry accidentally slams down the trunk onto his hands. All right, next we're at Pomodoro, and George is there with Kramer. He's wondering, why did you want to have dinner? And why at Pomodoro? We hear a woman in the background getting dumped. How could you say that to me? Turns out Kramer is there to sort of be a breakup surrogate for Allison. George tries to plead with him, but Kramer says, no, it's over, and he runs off. The actress in the background who's being dumped is played by Jane Edith Wilson. She's also appeared in ER, Curb Your Enthusiasm, and Significant Others. And I think she's great. What a fun day. What a treat to play this little bit part on Seinfeld, and she does it really well. I don't know if you guys noticed, but I think we were supposed to see her throw a drink on the guy because in the background, on just this watch for this podcast, I noticed the guy is kind of like wiping his chest and his arms a little bit with a napkin. So I think she was supposed to have like thrown a drink in his face and exit, but it obviously got cut out. All right, next we're in Peterman's office. Elaine walks in. Peterman and Peggy are sitting there, and she's ready to confess. I guess we should get this over with. But Jay Peterman says, no, we're still waiting for one more. She says, no, we're not. And Peggy starts, Susie has been very rude to me. Jay Peterman says, well, Elaine has nothing but good things to say about Susie. Elaine sort of then realizes she may not have to confess after all. She can pull this off. She tells them that, look, we don't need to name names or point fingers or name names. She talks about how they've had their problems. She and I, she and you and I, and she and Peterman. Don't you drag me into this. He says, this is between you and her and her. Yes, and if she were here, she'd agree with me. Who? Her? Where is she? Peterman asks. You see, this is part of the problem. Peggy feels left out. I thought I was part of the problem. You're a huge part of the problem, Elaine tells her. And then Elaine goes in for the kill, she says. But at its core, it's a Susie and Elaine problem that can only be solved by Elaine and Susie, Susie and Elaine. Well, that satisfies J. Peterman. We got that all cleared up. And then he wants to have lunch with all three of them. And Elaine, no, she doesn't want to do that. She pretends to be called out of the office and exits. And then Peterman asks Peggy, "What's your name again?" My take, this is a very strong Elaine scene. Oh my goodness, JLD has a lot to play with here, and she does it so well, no surprise. So once again, she's very ready at the top of the scene to confess until she realizes, okay, yeah, no, I can still keep this going. Although I do think it would be easier if she just revealed what actually happened. It would be pretty embarrassing for her and Peggy, but obviously we needed to keep this going for the plot. We kind of get like a who's on first exchange with the she and I and me and you and she and you. Who? Her? It's very fun. And then I do like the lunch invite. Elaine's like, I can't keep this up for an entire lunch. And pretending to get called out of the room, it's a bit of a cop-out, but whatever, it's fine. All right, next we're in Jerry's apartment. Kramer says Mike is outside waiting for you because he's too afraid to come in. Why is he scared? Jerry asks. Well, Kramer lets him in and Mike has casts on his thumbs. Did you do this? Hey, you broke his thumbs. Jerry tries to explain, but Kramer accuses him of roughing up Mike because he couldn't pay up. And then Mike makes a deal to fix his trunk and then they'll be square. Jerry agrees. Mike exits all excited, giving a thumbs up, but of course, he can't help but give thumbs up. Kramer confesses that, by the way, I broke your trunk. It's just a car. That's another great little moment. And it's just like, yeah, that's on track. Of course, Kramer broke his trunk. Kramer goes to leave, but then George arrives at the same time and they have an awkward exchange, the exes running into each other. Kramer goes into his place and George asks Jerry, what do you think? I don't know. I see the two of you together. Next, we're on the street. We're at Jerry's car. Mike is trying to fix the trunk, but he's getting frustrated because of his thumbs being in casts. So he climbs in and he's trying to get a better angle. But then Kramer backs his car into Jerry's, tapping it and closing the trunk and trapping Mike. He yells for help. Later in Jerry's car, Jerry is driving with Elaine in the passenger seat. He says he can't believe Peterman bought Elaine's trickery. Well, I'm fortunate to be surrounded by such stupidity. I know what you mean, he says. We see Mike banging and yelling for help in the trunk, and Elaine asks Jerry, did you hear something? He says, oh, the trunk is broken, it's rattling. Elaine says, I'm not sure how long I can keep this up. They're starting to give Susie assignments now. Well, there's only one option, Jerry says, eliminate her. Elaine's kind of shocked. What? Get rid of Susie. Make her disappear. I like her. She's gone. Gone! And he starts laughing. What's so funny? That bumper sticker. And then they both start cackling and Mike is just terrified. My take on this scene, it's moving the story along here. We know that Elaine is going to eliminate Susie, and it's just funny how it's misunderstood by trapped Mike Moffat. Next, we're at Kramer's door. George is pounding on the door, calling for Kramer, and he answers. It's 5 a.m. It's only 4. It's 4 a.m. and yet George is dressed like he's going to the office. Come on, people. George tells him he's been walking around all night thinking about Allison and me and you. Oh, come on, George. So George begs for another chance. Kramer grants it, even though he knows he's going to regret it. I'm going to make you both so happy. Kramer closes the door and George is ecstatic. Next, in Peterman's office, he asks Elaine where Susie is. He wanted her to head up the new fingerless glove division. Oh, I thought I was in line for that assignment, Elaine says. Nah. Elaine tells Peterman, well, I was going to wait to tell you this, but Susie took her own life. And Peterman is devastated. My take on this scene, there's nothing really to say except Peterman is absolutely insane. Next, we're at Allison's apartment. Kramer knocks on her door and she answers and he tells her that we're taking George back. What? Yeah, he's going to make us very happy. Next, we're at a funeral home, Susie's funeral. Jerry and Elaine arrive. She can't believe the turnout. My funeral isn't going to come close to this. Elaine sits in front of Peggy. Peggy says, oh my God, Susie? Elaine turns around. Oh no, I'm Elaine. But I've been calling you Susie. Really? Haven't noticed. Elaine excuses herself to go to the podium. Peggy says to Jerry, I guess I never met Susie. Suze? Jerry says, I actually had a little thing with her. Then he motions to Elaine, her too. And Peggy is just like totally scandalized. Elaine starts her speech. What can you say about a girl named Susie? And Elaine just looks up wondering. My take on the scene, we are in such broad comedy territory with the series now. I mean, an actual memorial for Susie is so ridiculous, but I accept it. I accept this era of the show because it's funny. They do it well. But yeah, you would never have seen something this ridiculous in seasons 1 through 4, probably. The reveal to Peggy, I have to say, is a bit anticlimactic, but it needed to happen, obviously. She was going to be at this memorial, so she's going to see Elaine. I do wish there was a little bit more of an exchange between Peggy and Elaine. Like, there's no remorse for calling her adult, the worst thing you could call someone. And I like the ending, though. What can you say about a girl named Susie? Next, we're in the funeral home parking lot. We see a distraught Peterman pull up and park, and he taps the back of Jerry's bumper. Man, Jerry's car is really getting tapped all over the place. And the little tap causes the trunk to open, and we see Mike gets out. He's blinded by the sun. Then he sees the sign outside the door that reads Susie's Memorial. He's totally shocked, and he heads on in. Next, we're at the pinstripe ball. George is waiting for Allison, but then Kramer shows up. George is confused. Where's Allison? Oh, she didn't want to come. But you took me back. Well, I did, but she's a tough nut. Kramer's excited about his tux. He says it's a rental, but I've had it for 15 years. So Kramer starts to head in. He's like, where are you going? The ball, silly. George is like, no. There's no way you're going in there. George, you said you were going to change. For her, not for you. Let's just try and relax and have a nice time for once. Kramer heads in, but then George grabs the back of his tux, which causes it to rip and Kramer to twirl all the way into the ball. Backless entrance after all. Wilhelm is so impressed. What an entrance! And who might this be? George has his arm around Kramer, and Kramer says, well, I'm with him. Next, we're at the funeral home. Elaine is struggling to talk about Susie. Also, much like myself, Susie hated going to the market. Peterman walks up. May I say a few words? Oh, God, yes, Mr. Peterman. He says, I don't think I'll ever be able to forget Susie. Huh? Elaine and Jerry look confused. Most of all, he says he'll never forget about a night where they were working late on the catalog, just the two of us, and we surrendered to temptation. And it was pretty good. Jerry turns to Peggy and says, yeah, but he didn't sleep with both of them. Wink. And he laughs and catches Elaine's eye, and she's just glaring at him like, what the hell are you talking about? But I never heard her calls for help, Peterman continues. And now Susie is gone. All of a sudden, Mike Moffat busts in, announces to everyone, Susie didn't commit suicide. She was murdered by Jerry Seinfeld. And then Jerry turns to Peggy. Not only that, I broke his thumbs. Then there's a tag to the episode. Peterman is in his office telling Elaine that he decided to establish a foundation in Susie's honor. And as Susie's best friend, he wants Elaine to be involved. Elaine tries to explain, Mr. Peterman, I'm Susie. She's me. And he thinks she's talking like more metaphorically, and he says, I feel the same way. Tells her that the foundation will run around her schedule, nights, weekends, anytime you have. And he exits. And we get the over-the-head shot and Elaine screaming, Suze! My take, it's an over-the-top ending here with Mike running in and saying that Jerry Seinfeld murdered Susie. But it goes along with the tone of the episode. And I'll get more into that when I cover the commentary from the extras. We also find out in this scene that Elaine hates going to the market. And I can see that. Elaine would get very irritated at any kind of market. She doesn't seem like she'd be much of a cook or have any interest in cooking. So any kind of errand there, no. Elaine's not going to tolerate that. I love the tag. I think it's really funny, sort of the parallel storyline to George and Susan Ross, or Suze Ross. And then I know they also called back that con shot with Suze, with the twirling camera. I've never been a big fan of that, to be honest. It doesn't do anything for me, but I know a lot of people love that reference. All right, I'm going to take a quick break, and I will see you on the other side. Let me ask you something. Do you have a job or do you have a career?
If you're stuck in a dead-end job that doesn't give you any pride or dignity, you might want to consider becoming a stenographer. That's right. One of those ladies sitting and typing on that weird keyboard in the courtroom. I'm telling you, stenography saved my life, and it could save yours. Hi, I'm Sharon Lipton, founder of Sharon Stenographer School, an affordable place to learn the art of stenography and some valuable life lessons. I wasn't always a hotshot stenographer who rents a room at the Staten Island Rec Center to teach folks stenography. No, I went through some dark times, and you will hear all about that when you enroll in my course. I know what you're thinking. Oh, stenography is a cakewalk. I could probably learn it on YouTube. Well, yeah, you could. But at Sharon Stenographer School, you'll get behind-the-scenes stories that only a veteran stenographer can tell you. For example, did you know most judges hate Skittles? That's right, they hate them. Don't like Skittles, they get stuck in their teeth. That's just a taste of what I bring to your schooling. Visit my website, www.backseatbimbo.purge, to enroll today. For a limited time, every new student will receive a carton of Lucky Strike cigarettes. Even if you don't smoke, trust me, you will start after working as a stenographer. Sharon's Stenographer School. Shorthand for the long haul.
And we're back. There was some commentary, as I mentioned earlier. David Mandel and Peter Melman did the commentary for this episode. David Mandel, to remind you guys, was the writer of this episode. He also went on to be the showrunner for Veep. So he and Julia Louis-Dreyfus have a long relationship. And I found this very interesting, but David Mandel was really, the whole time in the commentary, he was really just kind of making excuses for the episode. He really does not love how it turned out. But a lot of what he was talking about was like, this is the nature of having a show at this point of a season, basically. So we're at the 15th episode of the season. And I've heard this from other writers, of comedy writers on sitcoms. At this point in the season, especially this is, back in 22, 23 episode seasons for these types of shows, that middle to late point before sweeps, before the finale, where they really have to concentrate on getting those episodes right, you're sort of treading water and kind of like, okay, we just got to churn out these episodes. And that's what he was sort of alluding to in the commentary. And, like, for instance, he hated that ending to that scene where Elaine's like, what? I gotta go. Like, where she, quote unquote, hears someone calling for her. He's like, as he's watching this episode and doing commentary, he's really just like, yeah, see, that wasn't good. I just had no ending. So kind of had to just, go with that. It was kind of a cop out. Part of me, I'm like, dude, just relax. It's okay. It's a pretty funny episode. But it was interesting for him, looking back and going like, oh my gosh, I understand the mentality. This was the nature of writing for these types of shows. There were these episodes where we were just trying to get it out. We're just trying to he's like, the whole thing with Kramer setting his clock forward an hour before it's supposed to be set forward. That was a whole thing that went nowhere, right? The conclusion to all the storylines is pretty extreme, it's very broad, like I've been saying. So anyway, I just thought it was interesting how sort of disappointed, it seemed like he was kind of cringing at his own episode, being really hard on himself, which I think is a very natural thing for writers to do. Also, David Mandel, it sounds like I'm insulting him, but it was amazing. I don't think he stopped talking once. I think Peter Melman might have said at the most 4 sentences, but David Mandel just does not stop talking, and he weaves in and out of different stories just like seamlessly. And it was amazing. When the commentary, or when the episode was done and the commentary stopped, I was like, oh my God, I felt like my ears were ringing. Wow, that sounds really insulting. Anyway, he was saying very interesting things, but man, that man can talk. One thing he did mention during his nonstop talking was that Jason Alexander sang the theme song for his outgoing message way too well for Jerry's liking. He's like, because his Broadway came out, right? Jason Alexander is a very prolific Broadway actor, so he can totally sing. So when Jerry heard it, he's like, no, he's got to do that again. George can't hold a note. Jason Alexander can sing, but George can't hold a note. We got to make it as just plain as possible. In the notes about nothing, there was alternate dialogue in the opening scene with Elaine and George in the cab. So apparently Elaine was supposed to say, well, I'll give you $15 for his gigolo services. She's like, but we're not having sex. Oh, so we're going to talk all night? She says, no. Well, what are we going to do? You do what you want. I have plans. Not great. Again, that scene is not the funniest to me, but it's a Benestanza scene, so I'm not going to complain. All right, let's move on to Greg's sack lunch. Greg is our most dedicated contributor, and every week he sends us a sack full of his thoughts. Here are Greg's thoughts about the Susie. He says his overall thoughts. This is a great episode all around. I love both George and Elaine's stories, and even the small stuff with Jerry and Kramer and Mike work too. Coming off the Van Buren boys, which I didn't like that much, this is a much funnier effort from the writers. Well, I wish David Mandel could hear that, because I agree. He was really still just kind of hurting about this episode during that commentary. My Lord. Next in Greg's sack are his favorite scenes and Elaine moments. He says, we get a rare Jerry-free opening to the show, and even better, it's Benestanza. I like this little interaction, even if it's squeezed in just as a short bit. Elaine saying the Japanese would pay more for George because they're more enlightened and it's not about looks is such a backhanded comment. Her offering $1 for the whole night is hilarious too. George, of course, gets upset. Funny, even if very forced a bit on the premise and nothing to do with the rest of the episode, which has sort of been how these openings are in the season. Yeah, I know. The cold openings I feel like are very much interchangeable to different episodes. I mean, I guess not in the Van Buren boys because they do talk about presidential names. But yeah, this one, this one's a little bit forced in. But yeah, again, it's Benestanza. Who am I to complain? Next, Greg says, Elaine, or Susie as she becomes, and Peggy have such a fun dynamic that makes this entire episode great. They did a great job casting Peggy, and I love that we get a lot out of that guest actress here. She's quite funny in her bold, gossipy disgust of Elaine. I love how mad Elaine gets being called Suze, even when Susie is not correct. This is a great new character, which should have been milked episode after episode as a work enemy for Elaine. Agreed. Now, Megan Cole does come back, but only for one more episode. Yeah, she should have kept coming back, man. Although she was in both Star Trek Deep Space Nine and Next Generation, so maybe it was a scheduling conflict, but agreed. Such a great work foe for Elaine. Greg goes on to say, coupled with this, I love how Elaine describes someone she knows, this Sharon, who she acts out so hilariously, who is both a bulimic stenographer and a cheerleader. Everyone has name associations like this in their brains, and it's usually used as a sitcom trope when people are coming up with baby names, but I like how the writers chose to use it here. Yeah, totally. This Sharon thing is so great. And it's like, man, does Elaine have some strong feelings about it. But even though it's Sharon, it's somehow I think she thinks Sharon looks like a Suze. It's a complicated web, but at any rate, yeah, Sharon's got some problems. Next, he says, it's not an Elaine moment, but I love George's answering machine song. And the best part about it is when Jerry is singing it to himself later on the street. Seriously, one of my favorite moments of the whole series, and I sing this song to myself from time to time to this day. Oh, it's great. It's so great because the lyrics are so dumb. And I was a huge fan of The Greatest American Hero. I had a huge crush on William Catt, who played The Greatest American Hero. Yeah, that's all great. Totally agree, Greg. Next, Greg says, another great non-Elaine moment is Kramer's twirl into the ball. While the whole premise of Kramer being the proxy for Allison in the breakup, it works perfectly to close out that story. And of course, Michael Richards nails the physicality of it. Oh yeah, very broad, very over the top, like this whole episode, but it's really funny. And yeah, like his little twirl is, it all makes me laugh every single time. All right, next in Greg's sack is his scene swap idea. He says, while there's a lot of back and forth in this episode between the storylines and arguably Kramer's stuff with the Knicks game could be cut, it fortunately doesn't take up a lot of time, so we still get a great deal of Elaine and George, which is really what works here as usual. I can't really think of much I'd change other than Jay Peterman's ridiculous eulogy. Yeah, agreed. I have a couple ideas, but it's not anything huge. To your point, the Kramer thing doesn't take up too much time, and I agree. I love that Elaine and George get some ample real estate in this episode. Lastly, in his sack are Greg's extra thoughts. He says, "How does George get these gorgeous women? Is he still playing the widower card to get them to go out with him? Right? I know, like tall, blonde, lithe. That's not going out with George." Next, he says, Mike Moffat is a great character, and I love that he's come back in this one. He's the one who previously said, "That Michael Jordan is so phony," which is arguably my favorite line from a guest star ever. This time, he's a lot more over the top in his acting, but it works for this silly Dead Susie premise. Totally. They talk about that in the commentary about this actor, and shoot, I don't have his real name. I apologize, but just how wonderful he is. Apparently, he's in the Pirates of the Caribbean movies. He's a pretty big character in that. I've not seen those, but that over-the-top acting is what they were looking for, and of course, he just does it brilliantly. And lastly, Greg says, "Who paid for this bodiless fake funeral?" Did Elaine expense it like she did the Rat Hat? Oh, that's great. I wonder, right? I bet Peterman did. He was devastated. Of course he's going to pay for it. He's certainly not paying for an expensive apartment or decorations for that apartment. Maybe he had a coupon for it. Thank you so much, Greg, for sending in your thoughts. And now it's time to close Greg's sack lunch. Moving on to my favorite Elaine moments, I love when she gets in Peggy's face. "My name is Susie." And a close second is that I love the way she says, "Elaine and Susie, Susie and Elaine." She's so excited. And my final notes for the episode. I love this plot for Elaine. And yes, it gets a bit farcical and, like I've said many times, over the top, but it is very fun and it gives JLD a lot of range for comedy. So many funny, awesome moments. And I'll accept, people think broad comedy is kind of a cop-out. Oh, this isn't like smart humor. It's like, whatever, smart humor is great too. It's smart. It's not dumbed down. This is sort of dumbed down for the bonehead mass audience. I'm happy to be a bonehead, especially when broad comedy is done well. And let's face it, with JLD, Megan Cole, Mike Moffat, the guy who plays Mike Moffat, when they're at the helm, broad comedy totally works. And you can see why, especially with Megan Cole, they bring her back next season. It's magic. Her and JLD together, it's awesome. And then in the next episode she's in, you throw in Putty in there, come on, no brainer. Now, this isn't necessarily a scene swap idea, but a Benestanza convo or a moment about how close the name Susie is to Susan, I feel like could have been something. If you notice when Elaine is saying which versions of the wrong name are acceptable, Susie, Susanna, Suzanne, she doesn't say Susan. So I thought maybe a funny exchange about what does she look like a Susan, and George being really uncomfortable about Elaine hating the name Susan, whatever. There's so many, I think there could have been a little thing there, a little funny opportunity missed in my humble podcaster opinion. And I think that's all I can say about the Susie. Thank you so much for listening. Please do take a little time and rate and review the podcast. I'd love a 5-star. A 5-star review would just make my day. Also, please follow the podcast on social media. On Instagram, it's at Hot Heavy Elaine. On TikTok, at Elaine Bennis Podcast. And if you have some thoughts and you just want to email me, please do at elainepodcast@gmail.com. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you next time.